In the far future, war is not a temporary state, it is the natural condition of existence itself, a universe where conflict is not a mistake but a design feature, endlessly repeating across stars that have forgotten what peace ever meant. Warhammer 40,000 is often described as a setting where there are no good outcomes, only different shades of catastrophe. But today we push that idea beyond its limits and ask a far more unsettling question. What if every faction actually achieved its ultimate victory, not side by side, not through compromise, but alone, in its own version of a finished galaxy where all resistance had finally ended? This is not a story about heroes saving reality or villains being defeated at the last moment, but a thought experiment about success itself and what success truly means when survival, domination, and control are the only metrics left. Each faction believes it is fighting for the correct future, a necessary future, but when you strip away the battles and imagine the war already won, the galaxy that remains is never what anyone would call alive in the way we understand it. These are not alternate timelines meant to inspire hope or curiosity. They are warnings written in cosmic scale, futures where the struggle ends and something far colder takes its place. Because in Warhammer 40,000, defeat is horrifying, but victory is often worse, and tonight we explore the darkest possible outcomes when every faction finally gets exactly what it wants. If the Imperium of Man truly won, if every external enemy were crushed and every internal rebellion extinguished, the galaxy would not erupt into celebration or renewal. It would slowly harden into something rigid and unmoving. Humanity would survive on an unimaginable scale, but survival would be its only achievement, because progress, curiosity, and change would be treated as dangerous relics of a past that nearly destroyed everything. Entire worlds would function as perfectly regulated machines, producing soldiers, weapons, and resources in endless repetition, while innovation would be viewed with suspicion rather than admiration. Knowledge would not vanish, but it would be locked away, preserved like a corpse in a sealed vault, studied only to maintain systems rather than improve them. Humanity would become stable, unified, and functionally eternal, yet emotionally hollow, trapped inside its own fear of collapse. The war would be over, but the cost of that peace would be a civilization that no longer grows, no longer dreams, and no longer asks what it could become. In this future, humanity does not fall screaming into extinction. It endures quietly, frozen in time, guarding a galaxy that feels less like a home and more like a museum dedicated to its own survival. A victory for chaos does not look like conquest in the traditional sense, because there are no borders left to claim and no stable reality left to rule. If chaos won completely, the distinction between thought and matter would dissolve until existence itself became unstable, constantly reshaped by emotion, obsession, and impulse. The galaxy would no longer obey consistent laws, as time bends, repeats, fractures, or collapses depending on the currents flowing through it. Identity would become fluid, memory unreliable, and causality optional, turning existence into an endless experience rather than a structured one. There would be no final end and no lasting resolution, only constant transformation without rest. In such a future, suffering is not a phase that can be escaped, it is the environment itself, woven into every interaction and every moment of awareness. The war does not end because conflict becomes meaningless when everything is already consumed by it. This is not domination, it is dissolution, a galaxy that screams endlessly because silence itself no longer has a place within reality. If the Necrons achieve total victory, the galaxy would become perfectly ordered and completely lifeless, a place where chaos, emotion, and unpredictability are eliminated with mathematical precision. Every living species would be erased, not out of cruelty, but out of efficiency, as biological existence is treated as a flaw rather than a feature. The warp would be sealed, its influence nullified, leaving behind a universe governed by strict physical laws that never bend or fail. Stars would burn quietly, planets would orbit faithfully, and ancient machines would stand watch over a cosmos that no longer needs to react to anything. This future is calm, stable, and utterly silent, a tomb on a galactic scale where nothing suffers because nothing remains capable of feeling. The Necrons would finally have the peace they were denied long ago, but it would be a peace achieved by removing every variable that made existence meaningful in the first place. The Tyranid Victory is not an empire or an occupation. It is a process that ends only when there is nothing left to process. If the Tyranids consumed the entire galaxy, every world would be stripped down to its raw components, oceans drained, atmospheres devoured, and even microbial life erased without distinction. Civilizations would not fall dramatically. They would simply disappear as biomass is harvested and absorbed into a collective intelligence that does not remember individual worlds or species. Once the feeding is complete, the galaxy becomes a hollow framework of stars and dead planets, valuable only for navigation, not habitation. The Tyranids would move on, leaving behind a void that was not destroyed in anger or hatred, but efficiently consumed. This future is terrifying not because of endless suffering, but because of how quickly and completely existence becomes irrelevant. If the Orks truly won, the galaxy would transform into a single, endless battlefield where conflict is not a means to an end but the end itself. Worlds would exist only as stages for constant warfare, reshaped over and over again by explosions, fortifications, and crude industry. Orks would multiply without limit, feeding off the violence they create, ensuring that the cycle never slows down. There would be no final victory, no ultimate conquest, just an eternal present where fighting is the natural state of reality. For every other species, this future is unbearable, but for the Orks, it is perfection, a universe that finally reflects their instincts completely. The galaxy does not burn out, it roars forever, trapped in a loop of chaos that can never resolve because resolution itself would be a failure. A victory for the Aeldari would be quiet rather than triumphant, defined more by survival than dominance. Chaos would be weakened, extinction avoided, and their species would continue, but at a fraction of its former glory. Their civilization would become cautious, introspective, and deeply aware of how close it came to annihilation. Technology and culture would persist, but always under the shadow of restraint, as excess is remembered not as indulgence but as a near-fatal mistake. This is not a future of expansion or conquest, but of preservation, where every step forward is weighed against the fear of repeating history. The Aeldari would endure, but they would do so as a fading echo of something that once shaped the stars themselves. If the Tau Empire achieved total victory, the galaxy would become unified, organized, and stable under a single expanding ideology that prioritizes order above all else. Conflict would be reduced, inefficiency eliminated, and countless worlds brought into a carefully managed system designed to function smoothly and predictably. Individual freedom would not vanish overnight, but it would slowly erode as decisions are centralized and dissent is reframed as harmful rather than necessary. This future is not built on terror, but on control, subtle and systematic, shaping behavior through structure rather than force. The galaxy would be safer, calmer, and more productive, yet increasingly uniform, as diversity of thought gives way to optimized consensus. It is a future that appears bright on the surface, but feels increasingly narrow the longer it continues. A victory for the leagues of Votann would turn the galaxy into a resource network rather than a living ecosystem. Worlds would be evaluated, stripped, and optimized according to long-term calculations stored within ancient machine intellects that prioritize efficiency over sentiment. Nothing would be wasted, but nothing would be sacred either, as planets are reduced to materials and stars to energy sources. This is not reckless destruction, but deliberate consumption, guided by logic that sees the universe as a system to be managed rather than a place to inhabit. The galaxy would remain active, productive, and functional, yet devoid of wonder, transformed into an industrial equation slowly solving itself toward completion. When you place these futures side by side, a pattern emerges that is impossible to ignore, because no matter which faction stands victorious, the galaxy always loses something essential. Life, freedom, meaning, diversity, growth, or even the ability to change, all are sacrificed in different ways depending on who claims the final triumph. Warhammer 40,000 is not a story about finding the right ruler or the correct ideology. It is a setting built around the idea that endless conflict is the price of existence itself. The war never truly ends because an ending would require a future worth living in, and every possible victory replaces chaos with something colder and more permanent. In this universe, defeat is catastrophic, but victory is final, and finality is the most terrifying outcome of all. The darkest future is not one where everyone falls, but one where someone finally wins.